Power isn't tested in moments of control. It's tested in the silence before the storm. And Clara Whitmore had perfected silence. For years, she played the perfect wife, standing loyally beside her powerful husband as he built their empire. But when he arrived at the family dinner with his pregnant mistress, he thought he held all the power, until she revealed a truth that would change everything. Subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. The Whitmore Crowne Plaza stood tall as a symbol of luxury in the heart of downtown Atlanta. Its shimmering facade of glass and steel caught the light of the setting sun, casting a golden glow across the arriving guests. At 62 stories, it was the flagship property of Whitmore Holdings, a hospitality and real estate conglomerate that had grown over 3 generations into ventures spanning tech, development, and international markets. On the 58th floor, in the private dining room fittingly named the Crown, Clara Whitmore moved with practiced precision. At 41, she carried herself with the kind of grace that came from spending 2 decades as the wife of Nathan Whitmore. Her midnight blue dress was both elegant and understated. The diamond jewelry she wore was flawless but subtle. To the staff watching her, she was exactly what everyone believed her to be, the perfect corporate wife. "The lighting needs to be adjusted," Clara instructed, gesturing toward the elaborate crystal chandelier overhead. "Mr. Whitmore prefers it slightly dimmer for these events." The hotel manager nodded respectfully. "Of course, Mrs. Whitmore. And the temperature?" "Exactly 72 degrees, she replied. "Nathan gets irritable when he's too warm, especially during business conversations." As she surveyed the immaculately set dining table, Clara felt the familiar weight settle in, the anticipation of the evening ahead. The annual Whitmore Holdings family business dinner was more than just a meal. It was theater. It was politics. It was corporate strategy in designer clothing. Every detail mattered. "Mother?" Isabel Whitmore's voice cut through Clara's thoughts. Her 20-year-old daughter walked into the room with the confidence of her father and the thoughtfulness of her mother. Tall, poised, striking, Isabel greeted Clara with a kiss on the cheek. "Everything looks perfect, as always." Behind her came Julian, her twin brother, quieter, more reserved, but equally observant. Where Isabel had inherited their father's natural charisma, Julian carried a deep, measured intensity that always reminded Clara of her own father. "The board members are arriving downstairs," Julian reported, adjusting the knot of his tie. "Grandfather's driver just called up." Clara nodded. "Thank you, Julian. And remember what we discussed. Polite, engaged, but non-committal on any business matters." He gave a small smile. "I remember, Mom." Isabel rolled her eyes playfully. Another night of pretending we're the adoring family while Dad performs for his audience. How thrilling. Clara gave her daughter a measured look. "Tonight is important." "Isn't it always?" Isabel replied, but something in her mother's tone made her straighten slightly. "Is everything okay?" Clara smiled, lightly brushing a hand against Isabel's cheek. "Everything is exactly as it should be. Now help me greet your grandmother when she arrives. You know how particular she is about these events." He finished with a knowing smile. "I remember, Mom." Isabel rolled her eyes playfully. Another evening of watching Dad perform for his audience while we played the adoring family. How thrilling. Clara gave her daughter a measured look. "Tonight is important. Isn't it always?" Isabel replied, but something in her mother's tone made her stand up a little straighter. "Is everything okay?" Clara smiled, gently touching her daughter's cheek. "Everything is exactly as it should be. Now help me greet Margaret when she arrives. You know how particular your grandmother is about these events." As if summoned by her name, Margaret Whitmore swept into the room. At 76, Nathan's mother remained a formidable presence, her perfectly coiffed silver hair and regal posture commanding immediate attention. She had once been the wife of Charles Whitmore, the founder's son, who had transformed the original hotel into an international brand. "Clara," Margaret acknowledged with a nod that conveyed both approval of the room's arrangement and irritation at something else entirely. She glanced at her platinum watch with a frown. "Let me guess, my son is running late to his own dinner, again." "He mentioned a last-minute meeting," Clara replied smoothly. Margaret sniffed with thinly veiled disapproval. Charles was never late a day in his life. Punctuality is respect. and respect is the foundation of business. She lowered her voice, leaning closer to Clara. You allow him too much latitude. Clara's smile didn't waver. We all have our methods, Margaret. The older woman studied her daughter-in-law's face for a moment before patting her hand with unexpected gentleness. Indeed, we do, my dear. Indeed, we do. Over the next 30 minutes, the room filled with Whitmore Holdings' most important figures. The CEO of their tech division arrived with his wife, followed by the chief counsel and the heads of international development and finance. Franklin Miles, the board chairman and longtime contemporary of Charles Whitmore, entered wearing his trademark red pocket square and signature booming laugh. Each guest was greeted personally by Clara, who remembered their children's names, their food allergies, and precisely which topics would most engage them. By 7:15, 14 people were seated around the table. 2 chairs remained conspicuously empty. One at the head, traditionally Nathan's place, and another that had yet to be assigned. At 7:20, Clara gave a subtle nod to the waiting staff. Let's begin with cocktails. Mr. Whitmore would want us to start in his absence, Margaret commented from her seat near the head of the table. He's always been theatrical, even as a boy. He couldn't simply enter a room. He had to make an entrance. Clara simply smiled and took a quiet sip of her sparkling water. At that precise moment, the double doors to the private dining room swung open, and Nathan Whitmore finally arrived. The soft clatter of silverware stopped mid-air. Conversations died in the throat. Even the servers paused mid-step. 40 minutes late. At 45, he was still strikingly handsome, with the self-assured presence of a man used to owning every room he entered. His tailored navy suit and perfectly knotted tie spoke of a wealth that didn't need to flaunt itself. But tonight, the polish looked performative, like armor freshly polished for war. But it wasn't Nathan's appearance that brought the room to a halt. It was the woman on his arm. She was stunning, perhaps 28 or 29, with flowing black hair and delicate features. Her red dress, both elegant and revealing, hugged her curves and drew immediate attention to what was unmistakably a pregnancy. 5 months along, at least. A whisper shot through one corner of the table. Someone's wine glass chimed softly as it was hastily set down. Good evening, everyone, Nathan announced, his voice filling the room with the polished ease of a seasoned speaker. I apologize for our tardiness. I'd like to introduce Naomi Lin, our Special Projects Director for Asian Markets. He paused, his gaze finally settling on Clara, who sat perfectly still at the far end of the table. The smirk he wore wasn't just confident, it was weaponized. He had been waiting for this moment. A slight, knowing smile tugged at the corners of his mouth as he delivered the line he had clearly rehearsed. And the mother of my son, the next heir to Whitmore Holdings. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the chandelier lights seemed to dim for a second. Every eye shifted from Nathan to Clara, waiting for her response. Margaret's hand tightened subtly around her water glass. Across the table, Isabel and Julian exchanged a glance loaded with meaning that no one else caught. Nathan continued into the heavy stillness. I know this is unexpected, but business is about adapting to change, and Whitmore Holdings is preparing for its future. Beside him, Naomi Lin's confident smile began to falter. The tension in the room was palpable, but the way Nathan protectively held her arm suggested she fully trusted him. Her free hand rested gently on her rounded belly, an unconscious protective gesture. One of the board members shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Another pretended to check his phone. The room was frozen in time. The entire room held its collective breath, waiting for Clara's response. But there were no tears, no rage. Clara rose gracefully from her chair and walked toward the couple. Her expression betrayed nothing but polite interest as she extended her hand toward Naomi. Welcome to our family dinner, Miss Lin, she said, her voice warm and composed. Please sit here next to me. The honored guest's place. Naomi's eyes widened in surprise as she accepted Clara's hand. Thank you, Mrs. Wee. That's very kind, Naomi said quietly. Clara turned to the servers, who stood frozen near the wall. We can begin now, she said calmly, and please bring Mr. Whitmore his preferred Bordeaux. As Clara guided Naomi to the seat beside her own, Nathan remained standing, the Slack visibly unsettled by the reaction. The room hadn't erupted. No one gasped, no one stormed out, and that was exactly what unnerved him. This wasn't the script he had imagined. His eyes narrowed slightly as he watched his wife, still his wife, seat his mistress with the poise of a seasoned hostess. She even smiled. Not a plastic smile, but a patient one, like a teacher watching a student walk into a trap they set themselves. "You said she'd be upset?" Naomi whispered to Nathan as he finally took his seat at the head of the table. "She seems fine," Nathan replied with a forced smile, though a muscle in his jaw twitched. "She's just in shock," he muttered. "It'll hit her later." But it was already hitting him. Across the table, Margaret exchanged a knowing glance with Clara, while Isabel and Julian maintained carefully neutral expressions. But there was a tension in their posture, like coiled springs waiting to be released. Anyone who knew them well would have caught the subtle glimmer of anticipation in their eyes. As the first course was served, Clara took control of the evening with practiced ease. She turned to Naomi and asked, "Tell me more about your background and work experience." To everyone's surprise, Naomi was clearly intelligent and well-versed in international business, particularly in the rapidly evolving Chinese luxury market. "I was impressed with Whitmore Holdings' Yuko potential in Shanghai," Naomi explained, gradually relaxing under Clara's sincere interest. "I had analyzed over a dozen Western-led luxury expansions in China. All of them felt imported, not integrated. The luxury hotel market there is saturated, but no one has truly managed to merge Western luxury standards with authentic Chinese cultural elements." Clara nodded thoughtfully. "That's precisely what Nathan has struggled to articulate to the board. Franklin, didn't you raise concerns about the viability of our Shanghai expansion last quarter?" Franklin Miles cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably. "Well, yes. The projections did seem a bit optimistic, without a clear differentiator." Naomi straightened in her seat. Her voice, once cautious, now carried the quiet authority of someone who knew what she was talking about and wasn't afraid to be heard. "The differentiator is understanding that Chinese consumers don't want a Western hotel with Chinese decorations. They want an experience that reflects and honors their own cultural values while still delivering the efficiency and comfort they associate with Western luxury brands." There was a pause, one of those rare, reverent silences that follow real insight. As Naomi spoke with clarity and conviction, Nathan watched her with growing discomfort. This wasn't how the evening was supposed to go. Clara was supposed to be humiliated, emotionally unraveled. Instead, she was leading a business conversation with his mistress as if they were longtime colleagues. And worse, Naomi wasn't floundering. She was thriving. By the time the main course arrived, Naomi had unintentionally impressed most of the room with her sharp market insights. Clara, ever composed, had subtly steered the discussion to highlight Naomi's professional acumen, keeping the spotlight away from the scandal itself. "Tell me, Miss Lin," Margaret asked, her tone neutral, though her gaze was piercing. "Where did you complete your education?" "Harvard Business School," Naomi replied. "I was fortunate to receive the Hamilton International Fellowship." Margaret's eyebrows arched slightly. "Impressive. That's quite competitive." "Naomi was top of her class," Nathan added, jumping in, clearly trying to reassert himself. "And Naomi was top of her class," Nathan interjected, trying to steer the conversation back under his control. "That's why I recruited her personally for the Asian Expansion Initiative." Clara glanced at him, then turned to Naomi as she served her a portion of roasted vegetables before helping herself. "How long have you been with Whitmore Holdings, Naomi?" Naomi hesitated, stealing a glance at Nathan. "Almost 2 years now." Clara nodded, her expression neutral. "And when did you and Nathan begin your personal relationship?" The table fell instantly silent. Nathan set down his wineglass with more force than necessary. "Clara, perhaps this isn't?" "No, it's all right," Naomi interrupted, her calm composure surprising everyone. "We've been involved for about 14 months. I understand the situation is unconventional, Mrs. Whitmore, and I don't blame you for asking direct questions." Clara offered a genuine smile. "I appreciate your honesty, Naomi, and please call me Clara." As the main course plates were cleared, Clara remained the very image of serenity. Nothing in her posture, tone, or demeanor suggested she was a woman whose husband had just introduced his pregnant mistress at a formal dinner. If anything, she seemed to be the one quietly commanding the room. Nathan, watching her from across the table, felt a flicker of unease. This wasn't the Clara he had known, the composed but unassuming wife who had spent 15 years in his shadow, grateful for the Whitmore name and the life it afforded her. No, something was different tonight. And for the first time in years, Nathan didn't know what might happen next. As servers moved soundlessly around the room, clearing the plates, Nathan attempted to reassert his presence. He tapped his knife against his crystal water glass, drawing the attention of everyone in the room. "Since we're already discussing the future of Whitmore Holdings," he began, his confident smile sliding back into place, "I think now is the right time to outline a few of the changes I've been planning." Clara took a slow sip of her water, her eyes never leaving her husband's face. "The board has been concerned about our growth projections for the coming fiscal year," Nathan continued, now directing his words toward Franklin Miles and the other board members. "But with our new ventures in Singapore and the special partnership Naomi has been developing in Shanghai, we're positioned for the most aggressive expansion in our company's history." He gestured casually in Naomi's direction. "Our personal relationship notwithstanding, Naomi's connections with the Jiao Group will open doors that have remained closed to Western companies for decades." Naomi shifted uncomfortably in her chair, and for a moment, a flicker of something, doubt perhaps, crossed her features before she composed herself again. "I've been reviewing the preliminary documentation for the creation of a new subsidiary," Nathan went on, "Whitmore Pacific, which will oversee all our Pacific Rim operations. The documentation should be ready for the board's review next week," Nathan continued, "but I wanted to give you all a preview of—" "Nathan," Clara interrupted gently, setting down her water glass with deliberate precision. Her eyes didn't flicker, but the temperature in the room seemed to shift. "Before we dive into business projections, I'd like to know more about your plans for your family." The question caught him off guard. "My family?" "Yes," Clara said, her voice steady. "You've just introduced Naomi as the mother of your future heir to Whitmore Holdings. I think it's fair to ask what that means. For Isabel, for Julian, and for me." The room fell into an uncomfortable silence. Julian stared down at the tablecloth, while Isabel looked directly at her father, her expression filled with unmistakable contempt, the kind that simmers after years of small betrayals. Nathan cleared his throat. "Obviously, this is a complex, personal situation that will require adjustments for everyone. I had hoped to discuss the details with you privately, Clara, but since you've asked—" He straightened in his chair. A shift into performance mode, cool, controlled, rehearsed. "I've instructed our attorneys to prepare divorce papers." A few board members exchanged uneasy glances. One even looked down at his plate, as if hoping the conversation would vanish if he avoided eye contact. "And the twins?" Clara pressed. "You mentioned a next heir. What does that mean for Isabel and Julian's positions in the company?" Nathan waved a hand dismissively. "They're still kids, Clara. 20, yes, but still playing at causes and hobbies. They have years before they need to concern themselves with corporate roles. Julian's always been more interested in his environmental causes, anyway. And Isabel," he glanced at his daughter, whose face had gone cold and unreadable. "Well, Isabel hasn't exactly shown much serious interest in the business beyond spending its profits." A sharp inhale came from one corner of the table. Someone shocked he'd say it aloud. Isabel's knuckles whitened around her water glass, but she said nothing. "I see," Clara said quietly. Her voice was calm, but there was weight behind every syllable, like the quiet before a courtroom verdict. "And Naomi will be taking my place at company functions as the mother of the heir?" Naomi looked increasingly uneasy. "Mrs. Whitmore, Clara, I want you to know, I never intended—" "It's all right, Naomi," Clara interrupted kindly. "I'm not blaming you. I'm simply trying to understand the new arrangement Nathan has planned for all of us." Nathan leaned forward. His charm had returned, but it was slick now, artificial, like cologne covering a stench. "This doesn't have to be unpleasant, Clara. You've had a good run as Mrs. Whitmore. The settlement will allow you to live very comfortably, perhaps that villa in Tuscany you've always admired." Clara studied her husband for a long moment. Her expression was unreadable. Then she smiled. Not the polite hostess smile she was known for, but something different. Something Nathan couldn't quite decipher. Something that should have warned him. How thoughtful of you, Nathan. But before we discuss Italian real estate, she turned her attention toward the waiting staff and gave a small nod. Her smile lingered, but her eyes had already moved on. I wonder if anyone would care for dessert? I've asked Chef Pascal to prepare his famous chocolate soufflé. I believe it's your favorite, Clara added. Franklin Miles, the board chairman, gave a nod, clearly relieved by the change in topic. Indeed, Clara. No one does it better than Pascal. As the dessert was being prepared, Clara gently redirected the conversation to neutral topics. Julian's recent conservation project, Isabel's upcoming photography exhibition, and Margaret's latest charity initiative. Through it all, Nathan watched his wife with mounting irritation. She was supposed to be shattered, not gracefully hosting a pleasant dinner conversation. When the soufflés arrived, each one perfectly risen above its ramekin, Clara turned her attention back to Naomi. Tell me, Naomi, she asked casually, has Nathan shown you the Whitmore family photo albums? The history of the company? Naomi shook her head. Not yet. He's mentioned his father and grandfather, of course. Clara nodded thoughtfully. The Whitmore men have always been very proud of their legacy. Charles, Nathan's father, was especially focused on how the company would be passed down through generations. Nathan set down his spoon with a clatter. Clara, I don't think anyone needs a history lesson during dessert. On the contrary, Margaret interjected, speaking up for the first time in a while. I think it's important for Naomi to understand the family she's joining, especially as the mother of a potential heir. The emphasis she placed on potential was not lost on anyone at the table. Charles was an interesting man, Clara continued, ignoring Nathan's tightening jaw. Very traditional in many ways, but surprisingly progressive in others. He believed strongly in meritocracy within the family. Franklin nodded. That's true. Charles often said blood wasn't enough to earn leadership. You had to prove your worth to the Whitmore name. Clara smiled. Exactly. He was also quite forward-thinking in how he structured the company when he stepped down. Something in her tone made Nathan narrow his eyes and study her more carefully. What do you mean? Naomi asked, her curiosity genuine. Charles had watched far too many family companies destroy themselves through infighting and poor succession planning, Clara explained calmly. He was determined that Whitmore Holdings wouldn't meet the same fate. Nathan interrupted, his patience visibly fraying. My father left the company to me, his only son. End of story. Can we please focus on the future rather than ancient history? Nathan snapped. Clara's smile never wavered. But that's just it, Nathan. To understand our future, we need to be clear about our past. She turned to address the entire table. 15 years ago, when Nathan and I married, Charles was still CEO. He stepped down 6 months later, and Nathan has operated ever since as though he inherited full control of the company. Franklin Miles shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Margaret's expression remained unreadable. Because I did, Nathan said flatly. My father signed over his controlling interest to me when he retired. Everyone at this table knows that. Not exactly, Clara replied. Her voice remained conversational, but her demeanor had shifted. No longer just the perfect hostess. Something deeper, more resolute, was surfacing. Yes, Charles transferred his shares, but the control structure he created was quite specific. She reached into her handbag and pulled out a slim silver case. From it, she extracted a single folded document. I have a copy here if anyone would like to review it. Nathan stared at the paper in her hand. What is that? The original trust document that Charles created when he restructured the company, Clara answered evenly. The one that places 57% of voting shares in a trust controlled by, and I quote, the spouse of the CEO. The silence that followed was absolute. That's impossible, Nathan finally said, his voice tight. I've controlled those shares for 15 years. You've exercised voting rights as a proxy, Clara corrected him gently. With my authorization, which I provided before every board meeting and major decision. Check the records, Franklin. You'll find my signature on every proxy document since Charles stepped down. The board chairman's face went pale. She's right, Franklin admitted after a moment. I never thought much of it, just assumed it was standard paperwork for a CEO's spouse. Nathan's expression darkened with rising anger. This is absurd, he growled. Even if such a document exists, it was clearly my father's intention that I control the company. Actually, Margaret said, finally joining the conversation, Charles was quite explicit about his intentions. She met her son's stunned gaze. He saw how you behaved with your first wife, Nathan. He was determined that your second marriage would be a true partnership, at least in business terms. Nathan stared at his mother in disbelief. You knew about this? Of course I knew, Margaret replied calmly. It was Charles's way of ensuring you wouldn't repeat your past mistakes. He believed that a man who couldn't be trusted with a marriage shouldn't have unchecked control of a family empire. Family legacy. Naomi looked increasingly distressed. The color had drained from her face. Her hand trembled slightly as she clutched her water glass. Nathan, what are they talking about? You told me your first marriage ended amicably. Isabel let out a short, harsh laugh, one she quickly disguised as a cough. The sound was sharp, involuntary, truth breaking through silence. This is preposterous, Nathan declared, his voice rising. Clara has never involved herself in company business beyond attending functions and hosting dinners. Publicly, no, Clara agreed calmly. That was our arrangement. You wanted the spotlight, and I was content to observe from the shadows. But don't confuse silence with absence. I've been reviewing every report, every proposal, every financial statement for 15 years. She has, Julian confirmed quietly. Mom has a complete office at home. I've seen her working there since I was a kid. Nathan turned toward his son, betrayal in his eyes. You knew about this too? Julian met his father's gaze steadily. I learned about it gradually. Mom never said anything bad about you, if that's what you're wondering. She just taught us to ask questions, to see everything, not just the parts you showed us. Nathan turned back to Clara, his composure starting to crack. His jaw tightened, and a vein pulsed at his temple. So what's your point? Are you planning some sort of coup? Using this technicality to threaten me, because you're upset about Naomi? Clara's expression softened slightly. This isn't about Naomi, Nathan. Or not entirely. This is about the company's future. And what you've been doing with Whitmore Holdings' assets. She gave a nod to her assistant, who had been standing quietly by the door. There was a slight shuffle as the young woman stepped forward, carrying a stack of leather-bound portfolios, the kind usually reserved for final audits or legal proceedings. She began distributing them to everyone at the table. What is this? Nathan demanded, not opening his folder. His fingers drummed nervously on the table. Financial records? Clara replied calmly. Specifically, documentation showing how you've been moving Whitmore Holdings assets into shell companies in Singapore, companies that list you as the sole owner, not Whitmore Holdings. Naomi's hand flew to her mouth. Her eyes widened as the pieces clicked together. Pieces she hadn't wanted to examine too closely before now. The Singapore expansion, the one you said would be our new headquarters. She turned to Nathan, her eyes wide with horror. You told me that was all approved by the board. Franklin Miles had already opened his portfolio and was flipping through the documents with increasing alarm. These transactions, he said, glancing up. These were never presented to the board. This is embezzlement, plain and simple. It's a restructuring, Nathan snapped, to optimize our tax position and streamline international operations by removing company assets from the company? Clara asked, her voice level. That's an interesting definition of restructuring. Naomi was now staring at Nathan with a horrified expression. You said we were building something legitimate? Something for our son's future. We are, Nathan insisted, reaching for her hand. Naomi pulled away. Then why does this document show the Singapore company is in your name? Only yours, not even mine, not to mention Whitmore Holdings. The room erupted in murmurs as the board members flipped urgently through the pages in their portfolios. Nathan stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the polished floor. This is a setup, he declared, glaring around the table. Clara has clearly manipulated these documents out of jealousy. The documents came directly from our banking partners in Singapore, Clara replied evenly. I've already verified their authenticity with 3 independent forensic accountants. The originals are in the possession of our legal department. She turned to face the room, now composed of board members, whispering behind hands and glancing between folders and faces. Ladies and gentlemen, she said clearly, I've called an emergency board meeting for 9 a.m. tomorrow. I suggest you review these materials carefully before then. Nathan stared at her in disbelief. You're really doing this, destroying everything I've built, because your pride is hurt? For the first time that evening, a flicker of raw emotion crossed Clara's face. Not anger, but disappointment. I'm protecting what your father and grandfather built, Nathan, and what our children deserve to inherit, legitimately. She turned to Naomi, her tone softening. You can keep the penthouse for now, she said to Nathan. Naomi will need somewhere comfortable in her condition. Naomi looked up, startled at being directly addressed. I don't blame you, Clara continued, speaking gently to the younger woman. He's quite convincing. Call me if you need anything, for the baby. As Nathan started to object, Naomi suddenly cut him off, pulling her hand fully away from his, creating distance between them. You told me your wife was just a figurehead, Naomi said, her voice trembling slightly. That she had no real role in the company. You said we were building something for our son's future. She turned to Clara. I didn't know about any of this, about you. Clara responded with unexpected compassion. Few people do. That was the point. The dinner had completely unraveled. Board members were now on their phones, presumably calling their own legal counsel. Margaret sat back in her chair, observing her son with a look of profound disappointment. The twins remained silent, though Isabel couldn't quite suppress the quiet satisfaction gleaming in her eyes as she watched her father's carefully constructed world begin to collapse. Amid the chaos, Clara remained perfectly composed, just as she had been from the moment Nathan walked in with Naomi on his arm. But now, looking closer, one could see her composure wasn't born of shock or denial. It was the calm assurance of someone who had prepared for this moment for a very long time. As the weight of Clara's revelation sank in, the elegant dining room had transformed into something more like a war room. Board members huddled in tense side conversations, whispering rapidly while shooting glances toward Nathan, whose expression had twisted into a mask of barely contained rage. Clara stayed seated, her posture relaxed as she quietly watched the fallout unfold. When her phone buzzed with a text, she glanced at it briefly and gave a small, satisfied nod. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. This is absurd, Nathan finally declared, loud enough to command the room's attention. You can't seriously think you're going to take control of Whitmore Holdings over some obscure clause in my father's documents. Clara regarded him with unwavering calm. It's not obscure, Nathan, it's quite explicit, and I'm not taking control. I've had it all along. I'm simply choosing to exercise it directly now, rather than through you. And why now? He snapped. After 15 years of playing the dutiful wife, why the sudden power grab? Clara's expression cooled slightly. Because for 15 years you operated within certain boundaries. You made some questionable decisions, certainly, but nothing that fundamentally endangered the company's integrity or future. That changed 7 months ago. She turned to Franklin Miles. Franklin, when did Nathan first mention the Singapore expansion to the board? The chairman frowned, thinking. February. I believe he presented it as a strategic repositioning for our Asian operations, Franklin Miles recalled. February 12th, to be precise. Correct, Clara confirmed. 3 days after he opened the first shell company in Singapore. She turned her gaze back to Nathan. Her tone sharpened, not angry but surgical. That was your mistake. If you had created legitimate subsidiary companies with proper board approval, I might have continued our arrangement indefinitely. The room braced for what came next, but no one expected the shift to come from Naomi. Naomi, who had been listening intently, suddenly straightened in her chair. February? She asked, her voice small but steady. You started this in February? Nathan waved the question away. His smile was brittle, a thin veil over rising panic. The timing isn't important. It is to me, Naomi insisted, her eyes locked on his. She wasn't just asking now, she was accusing. Because in February, I told you I was pregnant. A new silence settled over the room. Not shocked silence, but heavy, knowing silence. You started moving money as soon as you knew about the baby. Naomi continued, her voice trembling now with realization. You weren't building something for us. You were building an exit strategy for yourself. That's why you suddenly proposed the Singapore office. It wasn't about Whitmore Holdings expanding. It was about you, creating an escape plan. "Don't be ridiculous," Nathan snapped. "The Singapore strategy has been in development for years." But the room didn't seem to believe him, and neither did his daughter. "No, it hasn't," Isabel interjected, her voice cold and clear, speaking for the first time since her father had arrived. "Dad, I literally heard you tell Mom 3 years ago that Singapore was oversaturated and not worth our investment. I remember because it was during that dinner with the Malaysian ambassador." Nathan's glare shot toward her. "Stay out of this, Isabel." "Why should she?" Julian asked, his voice calm but firm. "This affects her future too, both of our futures." Clara nodded toward her children with visible pride, then turned her attention back to the board. "As you can see from the documentation," she said clearly, "Nathan has already transferred approximately $43 million in company assets into his personal control. I've frozen those accounts," she added, "as of this afternoon." Nathan slammed his palm against the table. "You had no right." "Actually," said a new voice from the doorway, "she had both the right and the legal obligation." All heads turned. David Chen, chief legal counsel for Whitmore Holdings, stepped into the room carrying a leather briefcase. His timing was not coincidental, it was strategic. And final. He nodded respectfully to Clara before addressing the entire group. "As corporate counsel, I've spent the past 3 weeks reviewing Mrs. Whitmore's evidence and the original company structure established by Charles Whitmore." He looked around the table. "Her interpretation of the controlling interest is legally sound." Nathan stared at him in disbelief. "You work for me, David." "I work for Whitmore Holdings," David Chen corrected firmly. "And my fiduciary duty is to the company, not to any individual executive." He placed his briefcase on the table and began removing several documents. "Mrs. Whitmore contacted me 97 days ago with initial concerns about irregularities in the Singapore transactions. After a preliminary investigation confirmed her suspicions, I advised her to gather comprehensive evidence before taking action." Clara allowed herself the faintest smile. 97 days. During which time, Nathan, you never once suspected that I knew what you were doing." For the first time that evening, a flicker of uncertainty crossed Nathan's face. 97 days, he repeated quietly. "You've been planning this for over 3 months." "I've been watching you for 15 years, Clara replied simply. "I just decided to act 3 months ago." She turned, her focus now fully on Naomi. "That was likely around the time Nathan told you he was leaving me, wasn't it? When your pregnancy would have been confirmed through amniocentesis?" Naomi nodded slowly, her hand drifting instinctively to her stomach. "He said he was waiting for the right time to tell you that he needed to secure our future first." Clara's expression was sympathetic. "He was securing his future, Naomi, not yours, and certainly not your child's." Nathan stood abruptly, his chair screeching against the floor. "This is character assassination. I won't stand here and listen to these fabrications." "They're not fabrications, Mr. Whitmore," David Chen said calmly, sliding a document across the table. "This is a termination notice, effective immediately, removing you from your position as CEO of Whitmore Holdings, pending the full board vote tomorrow morning." Nathan stared at the paper, refusing to touch it. "This is a coup, a conspiracy between my wife and your father." Margaret interrupted, her voice sharp with restrained disappointment. "This is Charles's work, Nathan." She leveled a steady gaze at her son. "He knew you better than you think. He saw your ambition, your talents, but also your weaknesses." She turned toward Clara, and for the first time her expression held something new: respect. "Charles chose better than he knew when he approved your marriage. He thought Clara would be a moderating influence, someone who could guide you subtly when needed." Her voice quieted. "He never anticipated she would have to step in completely." Nathan turned to his mother, his tone laced with disbelief and hurt. "So you're siding with her now? Against your own son?" Margaret's expression remained stern. "I'm siding with Whitmore Holdings and its future, just as Charles would have done." With deliberate grace, Margaret removed an ornate gold and sapphire ring from her right hand, the same ring Charles Whitmore had given her on their wedding day 52 years earlier. She rose from her chair and walked around the table to where Clara sat. Her steps were slow but deliberate, like the final stroke in a long game. "This belongs to the true head of the Whitmore family," she said, placing the ring gently into Clara's open palm and closing her fingers around it. There was a slight gasp from someone at the table, a soft intake of breath that echoed what everyone was thinking. The symbolism was lost on no one in the room. For decades, that ring had stood as a symbol of the Whitmore legacy. Now it had passed, not to the son, but to the woman who had quietly, diligently protected the family's future while her husband chased his own ambitions. Not the heir by blood, but the heir by worth. Nathan looked as though he'd been physically struck. His mouth opened, but for a moment nothing came out. "Mother," he began. "Enough, Nathan," Margaret said, her voice tired but firm. There was no anger left, only clarity. "It's time to accept the consequences of your choices." As Nathan turned to confront the company lawyer, demanding access to the full termination documents, Naomi leaned slightly toward Clara, her voice barely audible. "What happens to me now?" she asked. Clara reached into her purse and withdrew a simple business card, sliding it discreetly to Naomi. "My private number. This isn't about punishing you or the child." Naomi stared at Clara's face, searching for resentment or rage but finding only calm, resolute compassion. There was steel behind Clara's poise, but none of it was pointed at her. "Why are you being kind to me?" she asked. "I'm carrying your husband's child. I believed I was going to replace you." Clara responded softly. "Because this isn't a soap opera, Naomi. This is real life, with real consequences, for everyone involved, including an innocent child." She paused, then added, "My quarrel isn't with you. It's with the man who lied to both of us." Naomi's eyes filled with tears. The truth of that hit harder than anything Nathan had said all evening. "I'm not staying with him," she said suddenly, her voice gaining strength. "Not after this. I won't raise my son with a man who—" She broke off, unable to finish the sentence. "You don't have to decide anything tonight," Clara told her gently. "But when you're ready to talk, call me. Your child is connected to my children, whether Nathan stays in the picture or not." The words landed like a safety net, soft but strong. Naomi nodded silently. Across the room, Nathan had apparently finished reviewing the termination documents and was now storming toward Clara, his face flushed with fury. "This isn't over," he growled. "I have connections, resources." "Resources that aren't yours," Clara corrected without flinching. "The financial team has already audited your known accounts. The properties in Aspen and Miami have been frozen, as has your private investment portfolio," Clara continued, her voice steady. "You'll retain your personal bank account and the penthouse for now, but nothing derived from Whitmore Holdings' assets." Nathan stared at her, incredulous. "You can't just erase me from my own family's company." "You were doing a fine job of that yourself," Clara replied, her tone finally revealing a flicker of restrained anger. "The difference is, you were planning to take the money and run. I'm staying to rebuild what you nearly destroyed." She turned to David Chen. "Is security ready?" The attorney nodded. "They're just outside, Mrs. Whitmore." Nathan looked from Clara to the lawyer, then back again. "Security? You're having me escorted out? Like a criminal?" "Like an executive who's been terminated for cause," Clara corrected him. "Standard protocol. As you know, you've ordered it done to others often enough." Nathan turned suddenly to Naomi, remembering her presence. "Come on," he said, grabbing her arm. "We're leaving." Naomi pulled away. "No," she said firmly. "I need to think." "Don't be ridiculous," Nathan snapped. "You're coming with me. We'll sort this out." "I said no," Naomi repeated, her voice stronger now. She took a step closer to Clara, instinctively creating distance from Nathan. "I'm staying here until I figure out what to do." Nathan looked at her as though seeing her for the first time, not as a possession or a symbol, but as a woman with her own mind and agency. The realization seemed to shake him more than anything else that had happened that night. "Fine," he said finally, his voice chilled and bitter. "Stay with her. You'll see soon enough that this is nothing but a temporary power play." He cast a cold glance around the table. "I built Whitmore Holdings into what it is today. It won't function without me." Clara shook her head. "You didn't build it, Nathan. You inherited it and nearly dismantled it for your own gain." At her nod, 2 security officers entered the room. They moved with calm professionalism. "Mr. Whitmore," one of them said, "we'll escort you to collect your personal items from your office, then to your vehicle." For a brief moment it seemed Nathan might resist, But then his shoulders slumped, barely noticeable, but there. The fight had gone out of him. At least for now. Without another word, he allowed himself to be escorted from the room, though not before casting one final venomous glance at Clara. As the doors closed behind him, the remaining dinner guests sat in stunned silence. What had begun as a polished, high-society family dinner had become the complete restructuring of one of the city's most powerful family empires. Prominent companies. Clara took a deep breath and released it slowly, the first visible sign of tension she'd shown all evening. It was small, almost imperceptible, but in that breath was the weight of 15 years, now exhaled. Then, with the same grace and composure she'd maintained throughout the night, she signaled to the waiting staff. "Please, everyone," she said calmly, her voice smoother than the crystal in their glasses. "The evening isn't over yet. Chef Pascal has prepared his famous chocolate soufflés, and it would be a shame to let them go to waste." As the desserts were served, the atmosphere began to shift. Forks clinked. Glasses were refilled. Shoulders relaxed, if only slightly. Conversations slowly resumed around the table. Board members spoke quietly about the upcoming emergency meeting. Margaret engaged Naomi in a surprisingly gentle discussion about her pregnancy and health. The twins exchanged glances across the table, blended shock and admiration in their eyes as they watched the mother they thought they knew. Julian mouthed, "Are you okay?" to Isabel. She didn't answer, but her slight smile said everything. Through it all, Clara played the role she had mastered for 15 years, the perfect hostess. But now, everyone present understood the truth. Her poise had never been just a social performance. It was the quiet strength of a woman who had been at the helm all along, waiting for the precise moment to make her presence known. Not a reaction. A revelation. The executive boardroom of Whitmore Holdings occupied the entire west side of the 53rd floor, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a sweeping view of the city skyline. At precisely 8:45 a.m. the next morning, Clara Whitmore stepped off the private elevator, flanked by David Chen and a team of 3 financial analysts. Unlike the understated elegance of the night before, today, Clara wore a sharply tailored charcoal suit that projected decisive authority. The only color was a sapphire brooch pinned to her lapel, one that matched the ring once worn by Margaret, now adorning Clara's right hand. Legacy on one hand, strategy on the other. "The board members are already arriving," David informed her as they walked toward the boardroom. "Franklin's been briefing them individually since 6 this morning." Clara nodded, reviewing notes on her tablet. "And operations?" "Minimal disruption," one of the analysts replied. "We implemented the contingency protocols at 5 a.m. All critical systems and communication channels have been secured. Mr. Whitmore's access credentials were revoked at midnight. His executive assistant, Miss Farrow, has agreed to stay on and assist with the transition," David added. "She's waiting in your office, the CEO's office, whenever you're ready to meet with her." Clara paused mid-step, a flicker of surprise crossing her face. "Jennifer is staying?" "I thought she was completely loyal to Nathan." David gave a faint smile. "She said, and I quote, 'I'm loyal to Whitmore Holdings, and I already know how Mrs. Whitmore takes her coffee.'" That drew a small laugh from Clara. Smart woman, she always saw more than Nathan realized. As they neared the boardroom, Clara looked ahead, her steps steady, her shoulders squared. The skyline beyond the glass reflected back not the wife of a legacy, but the woman now in command of it. Through the glass walls, Clara could see that most of the board had already assembled. Franklin Miles stood at the head of the table, gesturing emphatically as he spoke. Around him, expressions varied. Some concerned, others angry, a few simply resigned. "Are we expecting Nathan?" Clara asked quietly. David Chen replied, "His attorney called 20 minutes ago. Nathan won't be attending, but his lawyer will be present as an observer." Clara nodded. "Good. I'd rather do this without his theatrical interruptions." Before entering, she paused briefly, just long enough to center herself. Despite her outward calm, she was fully aware of the moment's weight. For 15 years, she had influenced from behind the scenes, with subtle guidance and quiet strategy. Today, she would no longer operate from the shadows. Today, she would take visible, formal control of a global empire with over 15,000 employees. At exactly 9 a.m., Clara Whitmore stepped into the boardroom. "Good morning," she said, her voice calm but resolute. "Thank you all for adjusting your schedules on such short notice." Franklin Miles stepped aside without hesitation, yielding the head seat to Clara. "Mrs. Whitmore has our full agenda prepared," he said. Clara took her place at the head of the table, as David Chen handed comprehensive packets to each board member. "You've all had time to review the preliminary materials sent last night," Clara began. "What you're receiving now is the full forensic accounting report, along with a proposed recovery strategy and immediate leadership transition plan." A distinguished man in his 60s raised his hand. Clara recognized him as Nathan's attorney, James Warrington. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, "I must formally object to these proceedings. My client has not been given adequate time to respond to these allegations." Clara met his gaze directly. "Mr. Warrington, these are not merely allegations. They are documented facts, independently verified by 3 separate accounting firms." She gestured toward the financial team standing near the door. "Your client is welcome to commission his own forensic analysis, but I should warn you, the evidence is irrefutable." "Nevertheless," Warrington pressed, "the sudden removal of a CEO is not permissible without, unless explicitly permitted under Article 7 of our corporate bylaws." Clara finished for him. "In cases of documented financial malfeasance, the controlling shareholder may take immediate action to protect company assets, pending a full board review." She smiled slightly. "I'm sure Nathan explained to you that I am, in fact, that controlling shareholder." Warrington's expression suggested that Nathan had done no such thing. Franklin Miles cleared his throat. "For the record, I've reviewed all legal documentation with our corporate counsel," Franklin Miles said clearly. "Mrs. Whitmore's authority in this matter is absolute and legally binding. The purpose of today's meeting is not to debate her right to act, but to formalize the transition and establish next steps." Clara gave a respectful nod of thanks before addressing the full board. "I understand this is unexpected for many of you," she began. "For 15 years Nathan has been the public face of Whitmore Holdings, while I've remained largely in the background. That was by mutual agreement, and at the time, it suited my purposes." She opened her copy of the report and guided the room's attention to several key pages. "However, as you can see from sections 3 through 7, Nathan began systematically diverting company assets approximately 7 months ago. The pattern accelerated dramatically in February, coinciding with," she paused briefly, "certain personal developments." Victoria Gia, the newest and youngest board member, raised her voice thoughtfully. "These Singapore entities, they appear to be structured for eventual separation from Whitmore Holdings altogether." "Precisely," Clara confirmed. "Based on the documentation we've recovered, Nathan was establishing a parallel corporate structure that he alone controlled. The Singapore operation was designed to absorb our most profitable Asian properties, while leaving the parent company burdened with debt." James Warrington shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. "The immediate question," Clara continued, "is how to recover these assets with minimal disruption to both our operations and our public image." She gestured to a section of the handout. "Page 23 outlines our proposed recovery strategy." For the next hour, Clara led the board through a meticulous, data-driven plan. She demonstrated an in-depth command of the company's finances, structure, and global operations, surprising several board members who had previously known her only as Nathan's wife. She responded confidently to questions about international banking compliance, detailed anticipated media responses, and presented a restructuring proposal for the Asian division that would strengthen, not weaken, Whitmore Holdings' market position. By the time they reached the final section of the report, even Nathan's attorney had fallen silent, scribbling notes furiously to relay to his client. "This brings us to the leadership transition," Clara said, calmly closing her portfolio. "Effective immediately, I will assume the role of CEO on an interim basis. David Chen will remain as Chief Legal Officer with expanded authority over compliance and ethics." She glanced down at her notes. "I'm also proposing Jennifer Farrow, currently Nathan's executive assistant, for the newly created role of Chief of Staff, to ensure continuity in day-to-day operations." Franklin Miles nodded his approval. "And the longer-term plan? Within 90 days, I'll present a permanent leadership structure for board approval, Clara replied. During that time, I welcome your input and suggestions. Whitmore Holdings has always been strongest when we leverage our collective expertise. Victoria Zhao leaned forward. And what message do we send to our employees and shareholders? This is a significant change. It's bound to raise questions. Clara had clearly anticipated the concern. By noon today, we'll issue a statement announcing my appointment as interim CEO. We'll cite Nathan's departure to pursue personal interests and emphasize continuity, stability, and our commitment to ethical business practices. She continued with confidence. For our major clients and partners, I'll be conducting personal outreach over the next 48 hours. Many already know me through company events, and I've quietly managed key relationships for years. James Warrington spoke again. And my client? What is being offered to Nathan Whitmore beyond the termination we've already discussed? Clara's tone remained professional, though it cooled noticeably. Mr. Warrington, your client attempted to divert over $40 million of company assets for personal gain. Under normal circumstances, that would justify criminal charges. The attorney paled slightly. However, Clara continued, for the sake of the Whitmore name and the company's reputation, I'm prepared to resolve this internally, provided Nathan cooperates fully with the asset recovery and refrains from any public statements that could harm Whitmore Holdings. She slid a folder across the table to him. These are our terms. Nathan retains his personal assets acquired prior to the misconduct, receives a severance package consistent with executive departure policy, and signs a comprehensive non-disclosure and non-disparagement agreement. In return, Whitmore Holdings will not pursue criminal charges. Warrington skimmed the document. I'll present this to my client, but I can't guarantee his response. Of course, Clara said smoothly. Please inform Nathan that he has 24 hours to accept. After that, our legal options will be reassessed. As the meeting adjourned and board members filed out, several paused to offer personal words to Clara, some respectful, others clearly re-evaluating her with fresh eyes. Victoria Zhao lingered until the room was nearly empty, save for David Chen. I'm impressed, she said candidly. I've been on this board for 8 months, and I had no idea. You were so thoroughly versed in every aspect of the business, Victoria said, still visibly impressed. Clara smiled. Few people knew. That was by design. May I ask why? Victoria leaned forward. Why stay in the background so long when you clearly had the capability to lead? Clara considered the question for a moment before answering. 15 years ago, when I married Nathan, Whitmore Holdings was still very much an old boys' club. Charles understood that. It's why he structured the company the way he did, giving me control, but allowing Nathan to be the face. She turned slightly, gazing out over the city skyline. Over time, I realized the advantage of my position. I could observe, learn, influence, without triggering the defensive instincts that women in power so often face. Nathan took credit for many of my ideas, but that also meant he implemented them. Until he crossed a line, Victoria said softly. Until he threatened the company's future, Clara corrected. And by extension, the future that belongs to my children. And now, to Naomi's child as well. Victoria raised an eyebrow at the mention of Nathan's pregnant girlfriend. That's remarkably generous of you. Most women in your position would want nothing to do with that child. Clara shook her head gently. That child is innocent in all of this, and regardless of how I feel about Nathan's behavior, that baby will be a half-sibling to my children. Family is family. As Victoria left the boardroom, David Chen approached, a stack of documents in hand. The press release is drafted for your approval, he said, and Jennifer is coordinating calls with our top 10 clients. He hesitated slightly. Also, Naomi Lin called while you were in the meeting. Clara looked up. Naomi, is she still at the hotel? She asked if you could meet her for lunch. Clara nodded, thoughtful. Schedule it for 1, in my private dining room. She glanced down at the paperwork, then back to David. And David, thank you for everything. The attorney gave a rare smile. Charles would be proud of how you handled this. He always said you were the best decision Nathan ever made. After he left, Clara remained in the boardroom alone, looking out at the city where Whitmore Holdings had begun 3 generations ago with a single hotel. The weight of responsibility settled on her shoulders, not as a burden, but as a quiet, inevitable shift, the moment when hidden power becomes visible authority. She glanced down at the sapphire ring, once Margaret's, once Charles's gift, now glowing against her own hand. The old man had been craftier than anyone gave him credit for. He'd seen something in his quiet daughter-in-law, something his own son had never recognized. The patience, the intelligence, the strength to protect what mattered most when the time came. At precisely 1 p.m., Naomi Lynn arrived for lunch. She looked tired but composed, and she had changed. From the woman who entered the night before on the arm of a powerful man, to a mother standing on the edge of a new beginning. Evening's cocktail dress had been replaced by a simple, elegant maternity outfit that emphasized professionalism over glamour. "Thank you for seeing me," Naomi said quietly as she took a seat at the small table in Clara's private dining room. "I wasn't sure you'd want to, after everything that's happened." Clara poured tea for both of them. "I meant what I said last night," she replied. "My issue is with Nathan, not with you." Naomi studied her carefully. "Nathan called me this morning," she said. "He wants me to move into the penthouse with him. Says this is all temporary, that his lawyers will fix everything, and he'll be back in charge within weeks." Clara's tone remained neutral. "And what do you think?" "I think he's delusional," Naomi answered flatly. "I spent the night reading through all the documents from the dinner. He stole from his own company. He lied to everyone, including me." Her hand moved instinctively to her stomach. "I won't have my son raised by a man with no moral compass." Clara nodded. "Have you decided what you'll do instead?" "That's partly why I wanted to see you," Naomi admitted. "I've been offered a position with the Jiao Group in Hong Kong, a legitimate one based on my actual qualifications. Victoria Jiao works quickly," Clara said with a faint smile. "It's a good opportunity," Naomi added. "The Jiao Group is highly respected, but it would mean leaving the country, taking Nathan's child overseas." Clara considered that for a moment. "Nathan has forfeited any right to dictate your choices," she said. "But if you're worried about family ties, we can make arrangements. My children should know their half-brother, regardless of the circumstances." Naomi blinked in surprise. "You'd want that? Even after what Nathan did?" "Children shouldn't pay for their parents' mistakes," Clara said simply. "Isabel and Julian understand that too." Naomi's eyes welled with tears. "I don't understand you, Clara. By all rights, you should hate me." Clara reached across the table, gently placing her hand over Naomi's for just a moment. "Would that change anything?" she asked softly. "Would hate undo what's happened? Or make the future any better?" Before Naomi could respond, Clara's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, and her expression shifted. "It's security," she said calmly. "Nathan is downstairs. He's demanding to be let up." Naomi tensed. "I don't want to see him right now," Naomi said quietly. "You don't have to," Clara assured her. "Security won't let him pass the lobby without my authorization." She paused, then added thoughtfully, "Though, maybe it's better to have this confrontation now, on our terms, while we're prepared, rather than let him ambush either of us later." Naomi hesitated, then nodded. "You're right, but I'd rather not face him alone." "You won't have to," Clara promised. Her voice wasn't just reassuring, it was resolute. This was no longer about confrontation, it was about closure. "We do this together." She sent a quick message to security, authorizing Nathan to be escorted up, but not to her private dining room, to the boardroom. By the time he arrived, Clara and Naomi were seated side by side at the long conference table, a united front against the storm they knew was coming. The door flew open like a threat. Nathan burst through. He looked like a shadow of the polished executive from the night before. His hair was disheveled, his eyes bloodshot, and his usually pristine suit was rumpled and clearly slept in. "There you are," he snapped at Naomi, barely acknowledging Clara. His voice was sharp, needy, more wounded ego than righteous anger. "I've been calling you all morning." "I needed time to think," Naomi replied, her voice steadier than Clara had expected. She didn't flinch. She didn't look away. Nathan glanced between the two women, his expression souring. "I see, you've chosen sides already. Let me guess, she's turned you against me too." "You did that yourself," Naomi answered, "when you lied about everything." Nathan scoffed, waving a hand dismissively. "Don't be dramatic. You think the business world is black and white? It's all gray, Naomi. Strategy, Positioning. Stealing $43 million, Clara said evenly, is not a business complication. It's a crime. Nathan spun toward her, furious. The mask cracked again. The charm gave way to fury. This isn't over, Clara. My attorney is already preparing a challenge to your so-called control. The board won't follow a housewife who's never even run a department, let alone a global corporation. Clara's smile was small, but it cut deep. It was the kind of smile a chess master gives before tipping the king. The board meeting concluded 2 hours ago, she said. The vote was unanimous in favor of my appointment as interim CEO. Even James Warrington agreed your position is untenable. For a moment, Nathan looked genuinely stunned. Then his face hardened again. This is temporary. You have no idea what you're doing. On the contrary, Clara said calmly, I've been doing your job from behind the scenes for 15 years. The only difference now is that I'll receive the credit for it. She slid a document across the table. These are the terms of your separation from Whitmore Holdings, Clara said, sliding the document closer to him. I suggest you review them carefully with your attorney. You have 24 hours to accept. Nathan didn't even glance at the paper. And if I refuse, then David Chen will deliver our evidence to the district attorney's office tomorrow morning, Clara replied, her tone steady. Embezzlement at this scale typically carries a sentence of 15 to 20 years. The color drained from Nathan's face. For the first time, the reality of his situation seemed to land, full force. You wouldn't dare, he whispered. It would destroy the Whitmore name, your name, the twins' name. That's why I'm offering you this alternative, Clara said calmly. But make no mistake, Nathan. If protecting the company requires legal action against you, I will proceed. Nathan turned desperately to Naomi, clearly hoping for an ally. You need to come with me. We need to present a united front for our son's sake. Naomi shook her head. I'm not going anywhere with you. I've accepted a position in Hong Kong. Hong Kong? Nathan repeated, stunned. You can't just take my son to Hong Kong. I have rights. Rights you'll likely lose if convicted of felony embezzlement, Clara pointed out evenly. But even setting that aside, I'm sure we can arrange a reasonable visitation schedule, if you choose to be part of the child's life. Nathan looked between the two women, the full weight of his losses finally settling into his chest. In less than 24 hours, he had lost his company, his reputation, his partner, and possibly his freedom. This isn't fair, he said, his voice suddenly smaller, brittle. I built this company into what it is today. You were its public face, Clara corrected gently. But the true strength of Whitmore Holdings has always been its people, the thousands of employees who do their jobs with integrity every day. They deserve leadership that reflects those values. Nathan stood still for a long moment, defeat sinking into every line of his posture. Then, silently, he picked up the separation agreement. I'll have my lawyer review this, he said, his voice low, as he turned to leave. Nathan? Naomi called softly. He paused, a flicker of hope flickering behind his tired eyes. I'll make sure our son knows who his father is, she said. The good and the bad. The rest will be up to you. Nathan didn't respond. He walked out without another word. For a moment, Clara and Naomi sat in silence, the tension fading like dust in late sunlight. Do you think he'll sign? Naomi finally asked. Clara nodded. He will, she said. Nathan's always been more concerned. She trailed off, finishing only with a quiet smile. With appearances than principles. Clara nodded slowly. The agreement lets him save face publicly, which, for Nathan, has always mattered more than anything else. Naomi studied her with new respect. You really do know him, don't you? Better than I ever did, she replied, then trailed off, her hand unconsciously resting on her stomach. I've had 15 years to learn his patterns, Clara said with a small smile. You had what, 2 years? Less, Naomi admitted. We only got involved after I impressed him with my presentation on the Chinese luxury market. She shook her head. I thought he valued my mind. He probably did, Clara said. Nathan has always been attracted to intelligence. He just can't stand when it challenges his authority. She rose from her chair, a quiet signal that their meeting was coming to a close. If you're serious about the Hong Kong position, Clara said, I'll have David draft an agreement regarding the child. Something that protects your independence while acknowledging the connection to the Whitmore family. Naomi stood as well. Thank you, for everything. I know this isn't how you expected things to go." Clara laughed softly. "Naomi, I was married to Nathan Whitmore for 15 years. I learned a long time ago to prepare for the unexpected." Her expression grew serious again. "Take care of yourself and your baby. And remember, family is more than just who signs the birth certificate." Naomi nodded and left. Clara turned back to the window, looking out at the city where Whitmore Holdings had been built across generations, led by men who believed power was their birthright. Now, for the first time, it would be led by someone who had earned it. Through patience, through vision, through unwavering focus on what truly mattered. The empire hadn't been seized in revolution. It had been claimed through revelation. And Clara Whitmore was ready to guide it forward, into a future built on stronger foundations than her husband had ever imagined. 3 months passed, like the changing of seasons. Gradual, but transformative. The Whitmore Grand Hotel continued to gleam in the skyline. But inside its walls, the atmosphere had shifted in quiet, meaningful ways. On the 62nd floor, in what had once been known simply as the Presidential Suite, now officially renamed the Whitmore Legacy Suite, as Clara hosted a small gathering. The space had been redesigned under her direction, still elegant, still luxurious, but warmer. Local art adorned the walls, replacing the imposing portraits of past Whitmore patriarchs that Nathan had insisted on. Isabel and Julian moved among the guests with easy confidence, no longer just the heirs of a troubled legacy, but the future of a redefined one. No longer the silent observers of their father's corporate theater, Julian and Isabel were now active participants in their mother's vision for the company's future. At 19, they were still learning, but Clara had made it clear. Their insights mattered. And more importantly, they were being heard. The Shanghai property projections looked promising. Julian was saying to Victoria Zhao, who had become something of a mentor over the past few months. The sustainability initiatives actually improved our market position, rather than adding cost. Victoria nodded, clearly pleased. There was pride in her expression, not just as a mentor, but as someone witnessing legacy evolve in real time. "Exactly what I told your mother. The Asian luxury market is increasingly environmentally conscious. It's not just good ethics, it's good business." Nearby, Isabel was in deep conversation with Jennifer Farrow, who had transitioned brilliantly from executive assistant to chief of staff. "The community engagement program has applications beyond PR," Isabel was explaining. She gestured with a tablet, showing data points and local school partnerships. "It's becoming a real pipeline, from local schools directly into our management training track." Seated near the window, Margaret Whitmore watched her grandchildren with a quiet smile. At 76, she had witnessed the evolution of the Whitmore empire through 3 generations. She had seen it built, challenged, nearly undone, and now reborn. But never had she seen such a seamless integration of family and business, values and leadership like this. "You've done well," she said as Clara joined her. There was something almost reverent in her tone. "Charles would be proud, not just of what you've built, but how you've built it." Clara took the seat beside her mother-in-law. "I've had excellent examples of strength," she said softly. "Not all of them male." Margaret chuckled. "I'll take that compliment, though God knows, I wish I'd found my voice earlier. Charles wasn't Nathan, but he was still a man of his generation." "You influenced him in ways that mattered," Clara said. "The trust structure, that was his. But the succession language had your fingerprints all over it." "Perhaps," Margaret conceded, "though I never imagined it would be tested so dramatically." She glanced toward the doorway. "Is she coming?" Clara followed her gaze. "She said she would. The flight from Hong Kong landed 2 hours ago." As if on cue, the doors opened. Naomi Lin entered, now 8 months pregnant. Her wardrobe, while adapted for comfort, still carried the sleek professionalism of a woman in control of her future. Every step she took radiated composure, not survival. Authority, not apology. Confidence radiated from her now, in stark contrast to the woman who had first arrived at the Whitmore family dinner months ago. Behind her walked David Chen, having personally escorted her from the airport. The room didn't fall silent at her arrival, a sign of how much had changed. No sideways glances, no murmurs, just genuine welcomes. Instead, Naomi was greeted warmly by several board members. colleagues who had come to know her through weekly video calls regarding the Hong Kong division. She was no longer the pregnant mistress. She was a respected executive, and more than that, she was a part of this new chapter, and part of something bigger. As Clara rose to greet her, the two women exchanged a look that held no bitterness, only understanding, only grace. Clara crossed the room to greet her personally. "How was your flight?" "As comfortable as you can get while carrying what feels like a future linebacker," Naomi said with a wry smile, gently patting her belly. "The company jet helps," Clara replied, returning the smile. "Perks of partnership." "In this case, earned," Naomi said warmly. The Jiao Whitmore collaboration had blossomed over the past few months. After taking the role in Hong Kong, Naomi hadn't distanced herself from Whitmore Holdings. Instead, she had become integral to the formation of a legitimate joint venture between the Jiao Group and Whitmore's Asian division, a vision rooted in cultural sensitivity and mutual respect, not exploitation. A much cleaner version of the expansion Nathan used as cover for his schemes, Clara had once said. "Victoria says Q3 projections are exceeding expectations," Naomi now reported. "The cultural alignment approach is outperforming traditional Western luxury models." "I saw the numbers," Clara replied. "Your team is doing excellent work." A flicker of hesitation passed across Naomi's face. "Is he here?" "No," Clara said gently. "Nathan sends his regrets. He's in Aspen for the weekend." The separation agreement had been signed without further drama. Nathan had disappeared into a life of curated appearances, charity galas, public romances, and interviews that never mentioned the mutual decision behind his departure from Whitmore Holdings. He had visitation rights to the child Naomi carried, but thus far he had shown little interest. "Isabel and Julian are eager to see you," Clara said, guiding Naomi toward them. "Julian's been researching the Hong Kong educational system. He's actually considering a semester abroad." As they approached, Isabel immediately embraced Naomi, a gesture that would have seemed impossible just 3 months earlier. "You look amazing," she said brightly. "How much longer now?" 4 weeks officially," Naomi replied, "but my doctor thinks he might arrive early." She rested one hand protectively over her belly. Julian, more reserved but no less sincere, offered her a seat. "We've been tracking the Hong Kong project closely. Your cultural integration model is really impressive." Their conversation flowed easily, professional insight blending with personal connection. Standing just a step back, Clara watched the interaction with quiet satisfaction. There was no tension, no awkwardness, only the natural exchange between people tied by both work and something more complicated, yet far more human. Margaret Whitmore stepped beside her, following her gaze. "Not quite the family dynamic I imagined for my golden years," she remarked dryly. Clara smiled. "No, it's better." Clara smiled. "Family evolves. The Whitmore family, more than most, it seems." "Indeed," Margaret said, her voice thoughtful. Then her expression turned more serious. "Have you told them about the board's decision?" "Not yet," Clara replied. "I wanted everyone here first." Margaret nodded. "It's time." Clara took a breath and stepped toward the center of the room, gently tapping her glass with a spoon. The soft chime echoed, and conversation faded as all eyes turned to her. "Thank you all for coming tonight," she began. 3 months ago, Whitmore Holdings stood at a crossroads. The future wasn't clear, and the challenges ahead felt daunting. She looked around the room. Board members, executives, family, not watching her because of her last name, but because of what she'd earned. "I agreed to serve as interim CEO during that uncertain transition," she continued. "Today, I'm honored to share the board's unanimous decision regarding permanent leadership." Franklin Miles, standing nearby with David Chen, stepped forward with a leather folder in hand. "As board chairman," Franklin said, "I have the privilege of formalizing this appointment." He opened the folder. "Effective immediately, Clara Whitmore will continue, not as interim, but as permanent Chief Executive Officer of Whitmore Holdings." Applause rose across the room. Isabel and Julian exchanged proud glances. Even Naomi clapped enthusiastically from her chair, her hand resting on her belly. When the applause faded, Clara raised her voice again. "I accept this responsibility with humility and with purpose. But leadership has never been about a single person. It's about building structures that reflect our values and protect our future." She gestured to David Chen, who stepped forward carrying several additional folders. Tonight, she said, also marks the formal establishment of the Whitmore Legacy Trust, a new structure designed to ensure the company's independence and ethical governance for generations to come. David began distributing the documents as Clara explained. 51% of Whitmore Holdings will now be held in trust, guided by a charter that emphasizes sustainability, ethical business practices, and community investment. The trust will be overseen by a council composed of family members and independent advisors to ensure balance and integrity. She turned toward her children. Isabel, Julian, as you come of age, you'll have the opportunity to earn positions of leadership, but nothing will be handed to you, simply because of your name. The Whitmore legacy must be earned, through merit, through vision, through integrity. The twins nodded, solemn and steady, accepting both the opportunity and the responsibility. Then Clara turned to Naomi. The charter also acknowledges all Whitmore descendants equally, Clara continued. Your son will have the same opportunities as Isabel and Julian, should he choose to pursue them, not because of his father, but because family extends beyond the choices of individuals. Naomi's eyes shimmered with tears. One hand moved protectively over her belly. Thank you, she whispered, not just for the words, but for the chance at a future built on something real. As the formal announcements concluded, the evening gradually shifted back into casual conversation. The air, once thick with tension and transition, now hummed with hope. Soft laughter and clinking glasses replaced applause, and Clara found herself standing by the tall windows overlooking the city where the Whitmore story had first begun. 3 generations ago, the family name had been etched into buildings, charitable foundations, and business cards. A legacy forged by men who believed power was their right by birth. Now that legacy would continue, on different terms, not by erasing the past, but by building on it. Brick by brick, value by value, with stronger foundations, with clearer values. Penny for your thoughts, came Margaret's voice as she stepped beside Clara at the window. Clara smiled. I was thinking about Charles, actually. Whether he foresaw any of this when he created that trust 15 years ago. Margaret considered that. Charles was a strategist. He saw your strength when Nathan couldn't see beyond his own reflection. But even he couldn't have predicted how it would unfold. She gazed out at the lights flickering across the skyline. He laid the groundwork, but you built the structure. He gave you the pen, you wrote the story. He gave you the tools, you chose when and how to use them. That was your wisdom, Clara, not his. Across the room came laughter. Isabel was showing Naomi something on her phone, while Julian explained a technical concept to Victoria and Franklin Miles. The future of Whitmore Holdings wasn't just being written, it was gathering, person by person. A living legacy, built not on fear or favoritism, but trust. Connections built not on obligation, but on respect. What happens next? Margaret asked quietly. Clara glanced toward her desk. The strategic plan, the international expansion, the sustainability directives, the new governance structure. All important, all necessary. But as she looked at her children, and at the woman carrying their half-brother, she understood something deeper. The empire was no longer just a business, it was a promise. The most important thing we do now, Clara said softly, is build something worthy of them. Something they can be proud to inherit. Not just the power, but the responsibility that comes with it. Margaret nodded slowly. Charles would drink to that. Clara raised her glass slightly. To the true meaning of legacy. As the evening unfolded around them, full of conversation, collaboration, and quiet celebration, Clara Whitmore stood exactly where she belonged, at the helm, but never above. The 2 women stood in companionable silence, watching the future unfold in real time. A future shaped not by the man who had once tried to claim the empire as his personal kingdom, but by those who understood that the true empire is not built on control, but on contribution. That real power isn't what you keep for yourself, it's what you build for others. The Whitmore Empire had found its true heir, not in a single individual, but in a vision of leadership, one rooted in integrity, earned respect, and a legacy of inclusion. A matriarchy born not from rebellion, but from revelation. A vision that would endure, long after the current generation passed the torch to the next. And in that quiet moment of reflection, Clara Whitmore knew. The most difficult decision of her life had also been the most necessary. Not just for herself, but for everyone who depended on her to choose what was right when it mattered most. Dear friend, if you've made it to this moment, I want to say something personal. Thank you. Not just for watching, but for feeling your way through this story. Because stories like Clara's aren't just entertainment, they're reflections. And if you felt something stir in you, maybe it's because you too know what it means to stay quiet for too long. The Stoics believed that we don't control what happens to us, only how we respond. The obstacle is the way, Marcus Aurelius wrote. Clara didn't fight fire with fire. She met betrayal with clarity. She met chaos with character. And when her moment came, she didn't rise to destroy, she rose to restore. That's not weakness, that's wisdom. Real power isn't loud, it's earned in silence and proven in choice. If this resonated with you, stay close. Tell me what it brought up for you in the comments. I'd truly love to hear. Tap the like button if it meant something. And if you're new here, subscribe so we can keep walking through these stories, these truths together. You and me, we're not just watching, we're learning how to live.